You'll never be the kind of man women compete over, my fiancé said while explaining why she needed more excitement in her life. I let her leave without resistance. Months later, she opened social media and found hundreds of comments asking the same question about me. You'll never be the kind of man women compete over. She said it the way people say obvious things, like she was pointing out the weather. I didn't respond right away. I just set down my coffee cup and looked at her across the kitchen counter, trying to figure out if she meant it as gently as she was pretending to. She did not. At the time, I thought she was describing a flaw I needed to fix. Months later, hundreds of strangers would accidentally prove her wrong. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Her name was Tiffany. We'd been together for years, engaged for 14 months. We had a shared lease, a joint savings account for the wedding, and a folder on my laptop called Venue Options that I hadn't opened since February. I'm 34. I work in operations consulting. Not glamorous, but the kind of work where results compound quietly and clients start calling you before they call anyone else. Tiffany was 31. She worked in brand marketing, was good at it, and had a social life that moved at a pace I genuinely respected but couldn't always match. That mismatch, which felt small in year 1, had become the weather in year 4. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until I started noticing what I wasn't noticing anymore. I stopped expecting her to be curious about my day. She stopped pretending to be. And somewhere in that unspoken negotiation, something had already ended. I just hadn't accepted the paperwork yet. It started with a party. Corey, a business contact of mine who ran a logistics firm downtown, threw a birthday event at a rooftop bar in late spring. 70 people, open bar, the kind of gathering where everybody talks loudly and nobody says much. Tiffany was dressed like she'd been looking forward to it for weeks. I introduced her to people I knew, stayed close enough to be present, gave her space to move through conversations on her own. That's always been my approach. I don't need to be the loudest person in the room to feel like I belong in it. At some point, I looked across the rooftop and saw her laughing at something a man named Drew said. Drew worked in real estate, dressed aggressively, and had the kind of energy that fills a room before he finishes his first drink. I didn't feel jealous. I felt something more specific, a quiet recognition that she was lighting up in a way she hadn't lit up around me in a long time. I should have said something that night. I didn't. The comments started small. Did you see how Carter walked into that room? Everyone just stopped. Grant has this way of making every conversation feel like an event. I don't know. You're just so steady. She said steady the way someone might say beige. Not cruel enough to argue with. Not kind enough to accept. I asked her once, directly, what she was actually saying. She told me I was being defensive. I let it go. Not because I was afraid of the conversation, but because I'd learned, slowly, expensively, that some conversations don't produce clarity. They just produce more conversation. My best friend Dustin heard about one of these exchanges and said, over lunch, man, she's not unhappy with who you are. She's unhappy that other people don't notice who you are. I thought about that for a long time. He was right. But understanding something and fixing it are different problems. We went to Jeremy's dinner party in July. Jeremy's an old friend from college. His place is warm, his guests are interesting, and his wife Elena makes food that makes people quiet for a few minutes when they first sit down. There were 10 of us at the table. The conversation moved well. At one point, someone asked me about a community infrastructure project I'd been quietly involved in, a housing initiative that had just cleared a major regulatory hurdle. I explained it briefly. A few people asked follow-up questions. The conversation moved on. On the drive home, Tiffany was quiet. I asked what was wrong. She said, nothing. I just always forget that you do things like that. I looked at her. Things like what? Significant things. You never lead with it. You never make people aware of you. Should I? She didn't answer. That wasn't the last warning. I just didn't know what I was being warned about yet. It was a Sunday morning in late August. We'd had a quiet argument the night before about her canceling plans we'd had for 2 weeks. She'd gotten a better invitation. She'd gone. I hadn't made a scene. She'd come home at midnight, and we'd both pretended to be asleep. The next morning, she sat across from me with a cup of tea and the expression of someone who had been rehearsing something. She said she loved me, but something was missing. I asked what. She said excitement. Energy. The feeling that choosing me meant choosing something that other people also wanted. I asked her to say plainly what she meant. She said it plainly. You'll never be the kind of man women compete over. Quiet kitchen. A neighbor's dog barking somewhere below. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, okay. Not because I agreed. Not because the words didn't land. They landed. I just understood, in that moment, that arguing would change nothing about what she actually believed. And I wasn't interested in making a case for myself to someone who'd already ruled. She looked surprised that I wasn't fighting it. I said, if that's how you feel, then we should end the engagement. She started to say something softer. I told her she didn't have to. By that evening, she had called Heather. I had called no one. By the following Friday, I had returned the ring box to her sister Brittany, who came to collect it with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sympathy, maybe, or something that looked like it from a distance. No contact, no announcement, no explanation to mutual friends. I just stopped. The first month was the hardest, not because I missed Tiffany specifically, but because I'd built my schedule around a shared future, and that future had an unfamiliar shape now. I filled the edges with work. Blake, my mentor and the person I trusted most for honest professional perspective, called me a week after the engagement ended. I hadn't told him anything. Word had reached him through the professional circuit. He said, I heard. Are you okay? I said, I think so. He said, good. Because I've been wanting to bring you into something for a while, and I kept holding back because I didn't want it to interfere with your personal life. This something was a leadership role in a public-private partnership project focused on urban infrastructure. Significant scope, multi-year timeline, the kind of thing that asks everything of you, and, if you're honest, the kind of thing you secretly know you're capable of. I said yes without deliberating. That was September. I want to be honest about what this period looked like, because it wasn't cinematic. I didn't overhaul my life overnight. I didn't start waking up at 5, posting transformation content, or making dramatic public declarations about new chapters. I woke up. I worked. I made good decisions quietly. I repeated. The project with Blake expanded. A regional nonprofit had been struggling to secure funding for a low-income transit corridor, and I got pulled in as an operational advisor. Abigail, the nonprofit's director, was relentless and well-connected and had been fighting this particular battle for 6 years. I helped her fight it better. We got the funding in November. Dustin took me to dinner to celebrate. He ordered expensive steaks and said, you know what's funny? You're doing the most important work of your career right now, and you haven't told a single person. I said, people who need to know will find out. He shook his head like I'd missed the point. Maybe I had. It didn't change what I was going to do. By December, my name was moving through circles I hadn't deliberately entered. Evelyn, a longtime client who'd moved into private equity, referred me to Sawyer, who was managing a portfolio that included several mid-market logistics firms in need of operational restructuring. That work led to a relationship with Parker, who was building something in sustainable supply chain that was 3 years ahead of where the market was paying attention. I took calls in the evening. I made decisions carefully. I exercised in the morning because I needed to think clearly, not because I was performing something. My mutual friend Kendra texted me in December. She said she'd run into Tiffany and that Tiffany seemed fine, but asked about me. I didn't respond to the part about Tiffany. I said I was doing well and that I hoped Kendra had a good holiday. Kendra said, you're infuriating, you know that? I said I'd heard that before. In January, Hudson, an organizer for a regional business and innovation conference, reached out through Blake. The conference was a 2-day event that drew executives, investors, founders, and policy people. They had a speaker slot open in the urban infrastructure panel. They wanted someone with operational credibility and a project they could point to. The transit corridor funding we'd secured was apparently a notable enough outcome that my name had surfaced naturally. I almost said no. Blake told me I'd be foolish too. I went. The panel was 4 people. I was the least credentialed, by title, of the group. Mason, the company director who moderated, introduced me by describing the transit project in terms that felt larger than how I'd experienced it from the inside. I talked about how the project actually worked, the decision frameworks, the funding mechanics, the community engagement strategy, the setbacks, and how we adjusted. At one point, Sophia, a journalist covering urban policy for a regional outlet, asked me a fairly pointed question about what most operational advisors get wrong when they enter nonprofit partnerships. I gave an honest answer. It wasn't diplomatic. It was true. The room was unusually quiet. The panel ended. People came up afterward. I had 25 minutes of conversations I hadn't planned for. I didn't think much of it after. I went back to the hotel, ordered room service, and reviewed documents for a call the next morning. Sophia's article came out 11 days later. She'd written a longer piece on urban infrastructure funding. I was quoted substantially. The framing around the transit project was generous. I read it. Sent Abigail a message. She was thrilled. What I didn't see, because I wasn't watching, was what happened next. A clip of the panel had been posted by the conference's official account. 45 seconds of my answer to Sophia's pointed question. Clear, unscripted, direct. The caption said something about leadership and public-private work. I don't know who first shared it outside the conference audience. But it moved. Someone posted it in a professional network group. Someone else shared it with commentary. Sophia shared the article again when the clip gained traction. A morning newsletter in the business community featured it with a short write-up. A podcast reached out. Then another one. Logan, my project manager on the Parker work, forwarded me a thread and said, "Did you see this?" I had not. He sent me a screenshot of a comment section. I don't know exactly when she saw it. Kendra told me later, months later, when enough time had passed that Kendra felt like she could say it plainly, that Tiffany had come across the panel clip through Heather's feed. Heather had shared it, not knowing what she was doing, presumably. Or maybe she did. I don't know Heather well enough to say. What I do know is what Kendra described. Tiffany had clicked through to the original post, watched the clip, then gone to the comment section. And the comment section had a question that appeared, in various forms, dozens of times. Is he married? Someone this composed and accomplished. Is he taken? I need to know if this man is available. Why don't I know anyone like this? How is someone like him still single? Women who didn't know me were asking about me. Publicly. In the way that Tiffany had once told me, plainly, that women never would. Not because I tried to make it happen. Not because I'd posted anything. Not because I'd done a single thing in the direction of proving her wrong. Because I'd built something worth noticing, and someone had happened to point a camera at it. Kendra said Tiffany didn't reach out to me. I wasn't surprised. What would she have said? There's no version of that message that lands cleanly. There's no framing where it doesn't read as exactly what it is. She had Brittany call Kendra. Brittany, apparently, was trying to gauge whether I was seeing anyone. I wasn't particularly. I'd had a few dinners with people. Nothing I was thinking about. But that's not the point. The point, and I think Tiffany understood this, which is why she didn't contact me directly, is that the problem had never been my desirability. The problem had been her perception. She had looked at a man who didn't perform for an audience and concluded there was no audience. She had mistaken private confidence for the absence of value. She had confused my disinterest in being noticed with the inability to be noticed. Those are not the same thing. They are so far from the same thing. Blake found out about the clip through the podcast circuit. He called me on a Thursday evening. He said, "You're getting some attention." I said I was aware. He said, "How do you feel about it?" I thought about it honestly. Like it's information, I said. Not a verdict. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "She said something to you, didn't she? Before you ended things. Something about this specifically." I told him she had. He said, "I'm sorry." I said there was nothing to be sorry about. She said what she believed. She was wrong. That's not a character flaw. It's just an error. Blake said, "Not everyone has that much composure about being underestimated." I said, "Anger at being underestimated is still giving the underestimation power over you." He said I should write that down somewhere. I didn't. I've thought about it since. Grant, an industry speaker I'd met at the conference, connected me with a podcast that covered business leadership and public impact work. The interview was an hour. The host was sharp and prepared. We talked about the transit project, the partnership structures, the operational philosophy. At one point he asked me something I hadn't expected. "You don't seem like someone who sought this out." The visibility, I mean. "How did you end up here?" I said, "I didn't end up here. I ended up building something, and this is where building it led." He asked if I'd always been comfortable with that approach, doing significant work without making sure people knew about it. I said, "I think the work knows who it's for. If it's meaningful, it finds its audience eventually." The episode released on a Wednesday. By Friday, Natalie, a marketing executive I'd met through Sawyer's Circle, texted me to say she'd shared it 3 times and it already had more engagement than anything she'd posted in months. I thanked her. I didn't check the numbers. Heather, I was told, had started following the podcast account. Brittany had sent the clip to her own group chat before she knew the full context. Someone in that group chat knew who I was and made the connection. By then, enough people in enough overlapping circles had seen or heard something. Mutual acquaintances who'd been at Jeremy's dinner party the previous July were texting Jeremy. Jeremy called me. I hadn't spoken to him since the summer. He said, "What is happening with you, man?" I said, "Work." He said, "That's all you've got?" I said it was all I'd been doing. He said, "Tiffany is going to have a full collapse when she realizes." I told him she probably already had, and that it didn't change anything. Jeremy was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're really not going to say anything to her? Not even just?" "No." "Why not?" "Because there's nothing to say. She made a decision based on what she believed. The facts changed what she believed. That's the end of the story." Jeremy said, "You're kind of terrifying, you know that?" I told him I appreciated the honesty. What Tiffany had to sit with, and I've thought about this not with satisfaction, but with something closer to clarity, is that she had been exactly right about one thing. I am not the kind of man who creates competition through performance. I don't build social tension. I don't make people aware of me through spectacle. I don't walk into rooms in a way that demands to be noticed. She was right about that. What she was wrong about, catastrophically wrong, is the assumption she attached to it. That women only notice men who perform for them. That real desirability is loud. That what can't be measured on a Saturday night rooftop has no value. The comments section proved what I could never have argued in that kitchen on a Sunday morning. Not because I'd changed, because I'd continued being exactly who I was, and eventually the right moment captured it, and people responded to what was actually there. She left looking for a man who would make her feel like she'd won something public. She walked away from a man the public would eventually want to know about. That's not irony. That's just a consequence of a misdiagnosis held too long. By spring, the Parker Project had delivered early results that exceeded the projected timeline. Carter, the technology founder who'd been watching it as a potential acquisition target, reached out through Brooks, a consultant who moved in several of the same circles. We had a meeting. It was productive. Adler, a recruiter who'd been trying to get me into a different kind of role for over a year, sent a message saying the calls he was getting about me had tripled. I told him I was happy where I was. He said he'd try again in 6 months. I said he probably would. Wesley, my financial advisor, sat me down in April and told me, professionally, that I needed to start thinking about what I was building as more than a career and more as an asset. I started thinking about it. Olivia, the executive assistant who managed my schedule across 3 overlapping engagements, told me I was the only client she'd ever had who consistently ran 3 minutes under on every call. I said I didn't like wasting people's time. She said people were going to start noticing that, too. She wasn't wrong. 8 months after the engagement ended, Kendra asked if we could get coffee. I said yes. I'd always liked Kendra. She was honest and didn't editorialize when she didn't have to. We sat in a corner of a coffee shop near her office. She ordered something complicated. I had black coffee. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "She misses you." I said I understood. Kendra said, "Are you at all?" "No." She sighed. Not unkindly. I figured. But she wanted me to tell you. For whatever it's worth. Tell her I hope she's doing well. I mean that. Kendra looked at me with an expression I didn't fully understand. Not pity. Something closer to sadness on behalf of a situation that had simply run its course. She said, "You know what the worst part is for her?" I didn't ask. But Kendra told me anyway. "It's not that the world noticed you. It's that she already knew. She knew who you were. She just convinced herself it didn't count because nobody else was saying it out loud." I held my coffee cup and thought about that. She had what everybody is asking about now, Kendra said quietly. And she left because she wasn't sure it was worth wanting. I nodded. "That's a painful thing to figure out," I said. "Yeah. I hope she figures out something better next time." Kendra looked at me like she was waiting for more. There wasn't more. That was the whole thought. I'm not going to claim I came out of this without anything to examine. I've thought about whether I was too quiet. Whether a relationship requires a different kind of presence than I gave it. Whether some of what Tiffany wanted, to feel chosen, to feel like she'd chosen someone the world also saw, was actually reasonable, and I dismissed it too easily as vanity. Maybe it was. Maybe that's a real need I wasn't meeting. What I keep coming back to is this. She didn't ask me to become more visible. She told me I was constitutionally incapable of it. She didn't say, "I wish more people knew this about you." She said, "Women will never compete for you." That's not a request. That's a verdict. And I've lived long enough to know that arguing against a verdict only extends the trial. I have also learned, and I mean this seriously, that visibility is not the same thing as value. The comments didn't make me valuable. They confirmed something that was already true. The work was always there. The competence was always there. The character was always there. The camera just happened to point in my direction. There was no confrontation. No final scene where I looked at her across a room and our eyes met and something was communicated. That's not how real endings work. Real endings are quiet. There's someone not texting back. They're a roster of mutual friends who gradually stop mentioning someone's name. They're a Sunday morning that becomes a Sunday afternoon, and then a month, and then you realize you can't remember the last time you thought about it with any weight. I still have the venue comparison folder on my laptop. I haven't deleted it. Not out of sentiment. I just haven't thought about it. Tiffany is still out there living her life. She is not a villain. She believed something that turned out to be wrong. We all carry beliefs like that. Most of them don't announce themselves this clearly. I have something to build. I have something worth building. I have people who know what I bring before I walk in the door. I didn't go looking for any of it. I just did the work in the only way I know how, quietly, thoroughly, without waiting for permission, and the rest arranged itself around what I'd already built. She left looking for excitement, only to watch the world ask where she could find a man like the one she left. That is not a victory I chased. It is simply what happened when someone who underestimated me was eventually corrected by a world I wasn't performing for.